I am now this really great poker player, and everything else in my life is the same.
Event number 6 champion, Dan Smith.
Wow. What a moment for Dan Smith.
I'm curious about some of your highs and lows in poker.
If people ever ask me how to go about making the break into playing professionally, I've always suggested that they not do it. At a certain point, my self-worth stopped being dictated on how good I was at poker. I was dealing with a lot of depression, and I kind of thought that the way that I would make myself happy would be get better at poker. I got food poisoning in the money during the 25K Monte Carlo high roller. And it got to the point where they were trying to get me to go to the hospital. And I'm like, I have 200K equity here. Had a nurse come, they put a heart rate monitor on me, and I think I have jacks, and it gets like cold 4-bet and 5-bet to me or something. The nurse is just like, your heart rate is at an alarming rate. We need to leave. And I'm like,
Dan Smith, welcome to the podcast. Well, catch you while you're sipping water.
Thank you for having me and for the very warm intro.
Yeah, of course. As warm as they get. I actually, I was telling somebody recently, one of my tricks when the waiter or waitress comes over to the table to check on you, for whatever reason, maybe early on it was some social anxiety, but I always put a bite of food in my mouth so I can just nod my head. That way there's no interaction beyond a nod.
That's strong.
Yeah, it is. Or it's incredibly weak. I think incredibly weak.
You have a thing you don't like, and now you don't have to do it. I don't know.
That's some rich guy shit right there.
Fair.
So, asking a rich guy here question about his ups and downs in poker. I want to, your career at this point is pretty long. I don't want you to have to go back to the beginning and explain everything. I'm curious about some of your highs and lows in poker. You've, had a lot of highs. Usually, unless you're really close with someone, you kind of don't know about their lows. So I'd be curious about both.
Should I start high or low?
Ooh. 1 or 2?
2.
Start high.
There was like this Twitter thread where you're supposed to rank your top 5 moments of your career. And when I was thinking back on this, so many of these moments, like I've had such good fortune, especially like a decade ago, that it's not just like, ooh, I had this good result in a tournament. Like, oh, I get 3rd place in the 25K PLO. And then like, even though registration is closed, they extend it by 10 minutes to get me into the 111K one drop. And then I chop it for 3.4 million. I've had a bunch of stories of just like going on runs. Like 2012, I won Player of the Year. And it kind of came from nowhere. Like 2011, I was a struggling, like my bankroll took a big hit after Black Friday. I didn't have that much money. And then 2012, I just went on a huge tear.
Was 2012, I know you won a huge WPT. Was it the Doyle Brunson one or?
That was 2013.
Okay. Shit. What was 2012 about?
2013, I was having a rough year. And then I just bang off the big 10K at the end of the year for 1.3. And I guess even just last year, winning the 200K Monte Carlo tournament, $4 million is a huge score, and it's very different than like cashing for 4 buy-ins and a 1 million, Winning a big buy-in tournament, I think it's just always special, especially one like those. And I guess I will lastly mention that like in 2012, I won 3 5Ks in a row over the span of like 5 days. So it was just like, couldn't miss that year,
Yeah. I found those to be the most fun. It's like the individual size of a score. I find it difficult to feel magnitudes better about one versus another in the same way that like just big numbers you can't conceptualize. But when you win multiple tournaments in like a week or 2 weeks or something, that's just an incredible feeling. I feel like that's very tough to come down from.
Yeah, it was just very special and like put my name out there, you know. As
No
far
points.
as lows, there were some big online games during COVID, and markets had taken a huge tank. Like my net worth just went down a lot, and there's not much to do other than play online poker. I was playing on GG and Party Poker, and I think over that month, I lost 100 buy-ins at 5Ks, and like nothing else was going well either.
This was during COVID?
Yeah, maybe like March or so.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of just thought maybe the online games were too tough, too technical, whatever, and maybe that I should quit. And Nicky P told me to stop being a coward and just keep playing. And I think the next month I won like 2 million or something. And It was just like, oh, wow. I've historically run very well after bad instances.
Mm-hmm.
I had another stretch where I was starting to worry that like maybe the high stakes were too competitive, and Nick just told me being dumb and to keep playing.
Yeah, I think, you know, you and I have pretty different paths. You're kind of an OG high roller when it came to the live tournaments, and I dabbled like the 25s, but wasn't, you know, definitely not a regular high roller, and was rarely in 100K until a few years ago. But I played big heads up online early on, and when the high roller scene was kind of passing me by, let's say 5 years ago, especially, Nick kind of was the same thing. He's like, you're actually talented at poker. Not everyone there is talented. A lot of people have learned what needs to be learned right now. But I kind of, when you bring this up and I didn't know about kind of Nick, you know, telling you toughen up, get back in there, champ. I feel like it's probably the same speech he was kind of giving me, which is like, look, you actually have a lot of skill and talent from a time that you had to be skillful and talented to make money. You can do this.
Yeah, I think I've had some anxieties that the idea of like replicating computer strategies wasn't really my skill set. It was part of the reason I lost interest in chess when I was like 15 years old. And I just don't have a particularly good memory. But some natural card sense probably does make a big difference, you know?
How do you feel about that now? Because, you know, I don't know about taking a break from the high rollers, but it looks like your volume really increased. What would you say, a couple of years ago after kind of playing less?
I did take a little break from the high roller scene. Some of it was after COVID. I was excited about doing some non-poker travel in sort of things that, like I went on an animal safari in Zambia, and then they announced Triton. And I think also I was just like not especially feeling myself playing high stakes. And at that time, I wasn't excited about the idea of like, I forget if the big buy-ins were like 150 or 200, but at that point I wasn't super liquid and I wasn't super confident. And I didn't like the idea of playing with a 10K piece, you know? But then I played some of the Tritons. I had some success. I was feeling it. And now it's like on the opposite, where it's just like, how am I going to play small stakes? I'm only going to play the biggest games. So I'm back in the state of feeling good about my game and the desire to play as big as possible.
So I want to take it back to what you were saying about, you know, memorizing and utilizing computer strategies and not feeling like that's your strong suit. Clearly you've done some work, you know, since that time when, you know, Dan's on safari. Now Dan's winning.
I've done a lot of study, and I think I'm pretty good about like making sure if I'm on a day I don't have anything to do, I'll do some work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what I mean by that is like sometimes I just get like, it folds to me in the small blind, I get both decisions wrong. And it's just like, how do I not know how to play pre-flop after 10 years? I've looked at the chart so many times.
Well, sometimes you're Danny Edibles at the table, right?
Sometimes, but even just completely sober, I mean, poker's a hard game, 30 is different than 50, which is different than 100.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
everybody struggles with it, but I do believe that I'm worse than population and that sort of thing.
That's fair. I would argue that it's also been to your advantage in some sense, in that when you miss something pre-flop, like just opening ranges in the small blind, it sends a signal that this guy doesn't know what's up, but way more what's up than that signal would typically. I kind of see it as a false signal to some degree, and I think it can allow you to be underestimated by a bunch of people.
I don't have a great sense of how I'm perceived, but it's good to know that people think I suck. Kidding.
Yeah. Obviously, they don't think you suck, but I think some of the kind of plays into something I wanted to talk about in this podcast, which is poker means something different to everyone. And within poker, people have different skill sets, not even speaking strategically. You've got some people who their skill set is talking people out of public games and privatizing their own cash game. I despise it. I think it's really frustrating, but for those people, it's turned out to be incredibly lucrative. And, they would say, look at these nerds studying charts, whereas all I did was read a book about how to socialize, and I'm nice to people, and now I make $2 million a year playing the equivalent of a 2-5 game at home with, a bunch of people. You get my point. There's all these different skill sets, and not to rehash, a small tiff that you and I had, but it's going to this is where my mind went to after you and I want to say Monaco. I can't remember what, but it started with Ponikovs and I are bantering about a hand. I had just bluffed him and we're on the stage. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And we're blabbering on and you're in a hand and you kind of turn back. You're like, guys, can you keep it down a little bit? Sorry, go ahead.
I would just generally say, at least at that time, I was thinking that I thought like discussing a hand history at the table, because it's just like, I'm like, ooh, okay, like what combos do I think he could have? And then when you're saying those exact things, at that time, I thought discussing hands while somebody was making a decision for tens of thousands of dollars was inappropriate.
Yeah.
I have since, the Jason Kuhn thing has since happened, and it's kind of softened me, and now I'm just more diligent about wearing headphones and noise canceling.
Fair.
Works.
Yeah, and I really didn't mean to pepper you with that. It's more that afterwards, you and I kind of quickly and cordially came to like an agree to disagree for the most part. I think we both heard each other out, and it was like, I should watch my volume a little bit. And then it kind of happened later. And I was like, I don't know. I think you should be able to talk at the table. You said something to the effect of it bothers some people more than others. And I said, sucks for the people that it bothers, basically. But me being kind of a dick in that instance, I did say cordially. I guess I won't. Anyway, what I came to was, look, that's me wanting poker to be about one of the things that I'm good at. I don't get so distracted by the table talk, but it's a perfectly reasonable thing to get distracted. It's just my upbringing. I was in games where you talked through the hands. I
played chess, where if somebody is eating a snack, they will get asked to leave the room.
Exactly. And the reason I bring all this up is to say that, if I look at it, just about everything, like the sports that I play, I want them to be about the things that I'm good at. And I want the things that I'm not good at to not matter so much. It's kind of like the status builds around certain things. And X number of years ago, your, knowledge of pre-flop poker was far less important than just kind of your swag on the turn when you check raise random shit because they'll always fold. And that stopped being the case. And, I talked to Ben, 86 about this a bunch, where, that was pretty painful for me. And I wanted the game to be about something else other than what it was. All of this is to say, poker doesn't really have this kind of clear, what is it about thing going for it. And I wonder how often we are just kind of making up our own narrative that fits our strengths and weaknesses. Curious if you have any thoughts around that.
I think generally, so people talk about bet sizing on flops and whether you use like the small size, big size split or one size, it doesn't really matter,
Mm-hmm.
I think trying to come up with what does matter is quite challenging.
Tournament Savagery is 25 hours of structured tournament strategy by Nick Petrangelo and Daniel Dvoress. This course covers pre-bubble, bubble, in the money, and the final table broken down like never before. We also cover post-flop ICM, blind versus blind, and much more. Pre-order now for $9.99 and receive multi-way mastery by Isaac Haxton, plus 2 months of GTO LAB Pro at no additional cost.
I do miss those days when it was really about swag on the turn and just outfoxing each other. Like, it was super fun. I think some people do just generally have good intuition, which if you're making good river decisions, you're probably going to win in the game. That's a very hard thing to... What's that?
I like that a lot. I think that's a really good summary.
It's very hard to do and also very hard to evaluate if you are good at it. And it's probably going to change in some periods of time, or just generally, like a thing I think I used to do very well was have alarm bells go off when somebody has big hands. And if you could sniff out like aces, kings at a disproportionate frequency, that's huge information. And then also like, okay, the absence of those alarm bells could be very pertinent and maybe it's a better time to like run a huge bluff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. When I hear you talk about making better decisions on the river, how did you phrase it again?
If you can make good decisions on the river, you'll probably be winning in the game.
Yeah. That sounds like I'm seeing the soundbite and I'm like, one of the clickbaity guys is like, great YouTube video, boom, make better decisions on the river. And the reason that's funny to us is you can't study it in isolation. It's literally the culmination of all the work is how you make better decisions on the river. And that's the complexity of poker, is that you can't really understand the river without having this full understanding of pre-flop, flop, turn, player tendencies, tournament conditions, all these different things. But it sounds great. Like, Dan Smith just offered a great piece of advice, what you should work on. Jaffe seemed to agree. There's agreement. Let's work on making better river decisions.
Call when they're bluffing, fold when they have it, get rich.
Holy smokes. We've got an intro to this podcast.
Trying to be serious for a moment. I do think when I'm on river decisions, sometimes like I feel like I could either go the physical path of like, his breathing pattern changed here. Do I want to like dive into that? Or sometimes like, okay, is there a difference between having ace 5 suited and ace 8 suited here? Like, does my kicker matter?
Mm-hmm.
And I generally feel like I could go down one of those thought processes, but not both of them at the same time. And then I just kind of have to decide which way I want to take it.
Yeah, makes sense. I think it feels like the ultimate goal is to merge them and apply some weight to one and some to the other. And it may be different for different, but I think in the end, I'd probably do what you're saying, which is one of them becomes dominant and kind of overwhelms the other.
I think there is a lot of merit to the intuitive part of your brain. I think sometimes we know things we don't know that we know. So sometimes rather than go into a long think, I'll just listen to my gut. And I think the gut isn't necessary. I think the gut might be like a culmination of those things, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I want to ask more about your gut, but I have a quick question. When you talked about breathing patterns, it brought me back to a story Bonomo told me once. Is there something, you had a heart rate monitor on you at the table? Can you tell me this story?
I got food poisoning in the money during the 25K Monte Carlo high roller.
Okay.
Like it started out, I was just like a little bit sick, and then it was like I was violently ill. Like to the point where like I set up a trash can like 8 feet away from the table, and in between hands, I was like throwing up.
Woof.
Woof. And then they're like, hey, this is really gross. Your trash can has to be on like on the other side of the room. And it got to the point where they were trying to get me to go to the hospital. And I'm like, I have 200K equity here. So they had a nurse come, they put a heart rate monitor on me, and I think I have jacks, and it gets like cold 4-bet and 5-bet to me or something. And then like the nurse is just like, your heart rate is at an alarming rate. We need to leave. And I'm like,
Unreal. Did you end up folding, or you put it in?
It probably would have been a fine time to like gamble, because it's like, hey, if I'm very sick, we're in the money.
Yeah.
But I'm like, listen, this guy who called 4-bet has been rock tight the whole day.
Mm-hmm.
I fold. He had king jack suited. The other guy had ace king. I would have been chip leader of the tournament. But no, I did fold into 7th.
All right. Sounds like not bad for violent food poisoning.
I had a funny memory of that where like at a certain point, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. So I left the table and just like passed out on the floor. And Donnie Stern comes up, like grabs me by the shirt, and he like, only 4 more hours, pal. You got this.
You were talking about there being a lot of merit in trusting your gut kind of being the culmination of, if I understood it right, a lot of the info that you might not be able to articulate in the moment, but that there is basically, there's wisdom there. And that's what trusting your gut is trusting that which you might not be able to articulate in the moment, but is sharp. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure.
So one of the things I'm always thinking about in poker, and as a coach working with different students, trying to tell them how much to trust their gut, when to trust it, when not to. And when I think about the wisdom that a person has subconsciously, if you will, a lot of it has to do with experience, if not like 90% of it. And it's not just experience at the poker table, it's often experience in this climate and in this type of spot. And basically what I want to ask is about, do you think about the variables that kind of make your gut something worth listening to in a moment versus, hey, wait a minute, I actually am not experienced in the situation despite having been, a poker pro for over a decade. This is an instance not to follow my gut. Curious if you can kind of get into the two.
I made a Run It Once poker video called The Pecking Order, where I discussed the idea that I think it's important to like rank yourself relative to your opponents. If one of your students is an amateur and playing against Steven Chidwick and faces like a B60 on the river, I would say they probably shouldn't listen to their gut if it like looks like a bluffy size,
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you're better than your opponents, or equal, that might be a thing to be worth listening to. I think assessing this is one of like the most important skills, and again, very hard to do. So whether you're trying to get into the Explo streets against them or just play your best version of poker.
Mm-hmm.
I like to play the 50K Players Championship every year, even though I'm inexperienced in the mixed games. And like, I'll let myself have thoughts of like, I think this guy is raising too wide on third, probably because he thinks I suck and he gets to play pots against me in Raz. But a lot of this stuff, like the more I don't let myself like go down that rabbit hole of trying to deconstruct their game.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like what underlies it is that if you have that thought, it's that they haven't had the next thought, that they haven't figured out like, well, Dan is also a really sharp poker player and a thinking player. And even though he, is at a disadvantage in Raz, he has a metagame train that starts. I feel like it's just kind of respecting the fact that if somebody is above you in the pecking order, that they've probably gone through most of the thoughts, if not all the ones that you're having right now, and then probably one, maybe two more levels of thought.
I think that's well said. And like, yeah, I have never been in a situation where it's like, okay, I think this guy's raising too wide, so now I'm 3-betting extra wide, and now I'm playing in like these wide range spots that I'm not comfortable, where I think like the edges get bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what happens often when you see some of the worst hand histories that a person plays. It's they felt outclassed, and then they kind of started the metagame train in their head, and it went so far off the tracks, and you're like, oh, yeah, I told myself a lot of stories that got me here, and if any one of them was wrong or flawed, this is pretty terrible.
Or if your opponent is just not playing that game at all, and now you deviated for no reason.
That was the issue I ran into very often. Was I was just like, all right, let's 4-bet the first 3-bet, and they're just like, what? They're just playing ranges. Like, why would I do that? So something about me is that I am an ignorant motherfucker, and I played Poker Stars forever and almost no full tilt at all, which was crazy because 20 to 30% of the volume for my specialty, heads up sit and goes, was on full tilt. It was right there. I could have just had the other program and more lobbies open, and I just didn't do it for, pretty much my entire career. And so I had heard of King Dan. I know this is just so fucking insane. I had heard of King Dan. Didn't really know anything about that. At some point connected it to Dan Smith. But my experience with you was as Danny 98765.
Yeah, that was my AIM screen name when I was like 12 years old.
Okay. And that was your Stars name as well. And so that was, we played together occasionally in tournaments, and I didn't think much. It's a very nondescript name. And we encountered each other in tournaments. And I remember thinking, yeah, this guy is a capable reg, and he always beats me in pots. I didn't think you were necessarily a great player. I just like, fuck, this guy holds over on me. I don't know. Later, I find out, yeah, you're just crushing me. You and Sir Watts were like two people who both held over on me, but also just crushed my ass. And like, if you'd asked me, I would have said, yeah, they're both kind of nitty. But no, you just knew when to bluff me. And I feel like I never caught you. Do you remember who would kick your ass back in the day, whether it was held over on you or actually had your number or both?
How far back in the day?
Let's do a couple back in the days. Let's do we'll go backwards. Let's start at the top. Who holds over on you currently? Not who crushes you, but who do you not win a pot versus?
No names super jump out at me.
Blessed guy. What a blessed man.
I haven't won many big pots against Adrian.
That kind of checks out with the last couple of years.
Yeah.
That's okay. Let's go back. I want to go to early high roller days. Let's say when you've got the first kind of class of Germans, let's say pre-Fedor. Anyone really have your number intimidate you back then?
I'm going to be direct here. At like 2014, 2015, I just thought I was like kind of clearly the best tournament player in the world. And I was like open to cross books. So at that stage, not especially. I was also quite
online days.
There was an example of Ike and I were playing. I don't even remember what it was called, but the Global Poker Index had this like country versus country tournament thing. Do you know what I'm talking about at all?
Mm-mm.
Oh
wait, was it like did it happen in the Bahamas? That might have been a Poker Stars thing I'm thinking of.
I think it happened somewhere in Europe, but the reason I bring it up is Vitaly Lunkin was playing, and I just told Ike, like, this guy gives me the heebie-jeebies. You're playing against him. The guy who's tight and has a tight image, who's capable of bluffing, is just always a tough player to play against.
Mm-hmm.
And at that stage in my career, like, I really like to put in a lot of money, and I was worried I'd have a situation against him where it's like, man, it really seems like you should fold kings, but he could come up with the bluff, and I was just like, no, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's a very uncomfortable spot when you know someone is a capable player, but you've just seen them have it all the time, and you're just like, theoretically, I understand he can and will bluff, but no bone in my body is going to want to put calling chips in. I feel so far from baseline theory, and not in a good way. I don't want to play this guy.
Yeah. And I was just like, you deal with this.
I've seen people get into that against Kerry Katz before, where they've just kind of seen Kerry have it all the time. They know he bluffs, but they haven't seen it exactly. I think some of the Europeans got crushed by Kerry for a long time with that premise.
He definitely has some tricks, and I've seen him get some people. And I will just say that I have gone through a stretch where I particularly did not enjoy playing against Stevie. I remember, like, early on in his, like, super high roller days, he was doing his stare down, and I'm like, this guy's trying to stare at me. Good luck, buddy. And then he starts winning a lot of tournaments, and you're like, now it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And he's definitely gotten the best of me in some spots over the years. So the delayed answer to your question, Chidwick.
So on the heels of that answer about Stevie, it brings me to something that it almost feels like asking about mysticism, where you're just like, come on, leave me alone. But wait, okay, hang on. There is a kernel of truth. Let's get into it. And that is momentum in poker. If somebody asks you about momentum, I quickly want to shut it down and say, shut the fuck up. Like, the cards are pretty independent and you're just creating patterns. Adrian didn't go from being a good player who, whatever his results were, say 3 years ago and 4 years ago, to, the best player by a long shot. It just, everyone has their ups and their downs. But you did just describe something that, may have in some way influenced decisions here and there when you played Stevie. At the minimum, you mentioned it added some discomfort. Want to riff about momentum at all?
I am a big momentum believer. I very much feel it when I play. I go through times when I'm playing poker and it's completely effortless. I go through periods where I'm super confident in my live reads, and it's just, I think humans are complex creatures, and both winning and losing can have effects on the brain in ways that we don't necessarily know. Of course, winner's talk could be a thing that some people start winning and they start spewing. I think a lot of my success when I was going on some old school heaters was that people were afraid of me. And then when you're afraid of someone, you don't play your best. Mm-hmm. I think there was a big defining moment once I started winning where, like, when I was a shot taking these high stakes and worried about whether I was going to be like, get to stay in the 100Ks, for instance. Because obviously at that time I was not taking huge pieces and I was selling action and whatever. In the thought of the back of your mind of like, hey, this might look silly. And then once I like winning 3 tournaments in Monte Carlo, it's kind of just like, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, try to stop me.
Mm-hmm.
I am a big believer in it. I think when I personally win a tennis match, I am much more likely to win my next tennis match. Like my form comes in waves. Even throughout the match, I'm playing good. Like I don't even think about it, And then you miss a couple shots and you're like, what do I do with my feet?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm aware of like the intellectual argument of momentum not being a relevant thing. In my experience, I feel it and I think I perceive it.
When you point it out in tennis, like you're not going to find anyone who disagrees about momentum in tennis, like momentum in racket sports and generally sports on the whole is pretty universally agreed as a relevant factor. To what degree, people will disagree. But I like the example you gave. You lose a couple points, say, what do I do with my feet? And what I get there is an explanation of what it means to tighten up. It's tightening up your thoughts. You're zoomed in to one thing that may or may not be wrong, your footwork, and you're losing track of what's most salient. When you're in the flow, when you are really confident, and I think this is true in poker too, it's not that you're necessarily gathering, let's say, 3x as much data as you are during a hand when you're not confident. It's your ability to decide what's most relevant, to say like, my combo, like the fact that I unblock the back door is not the most important thing here. This dude is backed and he does not want to make a silly call off. And that is the most important thing here, and then that's what's going on. I think whether you're playing sports and when you're at the table is we're not 100% rational beasts. You've got guys in the tournament who want to hoist a trophy. Even professionals, take Ivy, for example, he has endorsements and whatnot that are going to make winning a tournament far more profitable and important than simply the ICM value. And not taking that into account would be a huge error in playing a final table with Phil.
Or some days he's just clearly locked in and trying hard, and some days he's more focused on betting sports.
Yeah. And I think that that's true for all sorts of professionals and recreationals. And that's kind of what I take for being in the zone is your ability to realize what's most relevant and what's most important in your decision making. That's kind of my takeaway.
I think when you're winning, it's easy to give yourself the green light.
Yeah.
And then some people I think will do well with it. And maybe some people shouldn't have the green light, but I also just generally think a little bit of like the thought process when you're losing is just going to be harder. Like going back to Raz, like people say it's an easy game. I think I'm just bad at it. Like I don't even understand why, but a lot of it would just be like, okay, you're playing Raz. Don't fuck up. And then I make an obvious mistake on third that I know better than, and it's just like, this doesn't happen to me in no limit, So I think just feeling good about your decision-making process can both lead to making good decisions and avoiding mistakes.
Yeah. When I think about poker and even in sports, willpower can't win the day. It's helpful, more and less in different situations, but willpower is maybe what you need to study a lot or to train a lot for your sport. But in the end, there's just kind of like a decision that needs to be made in this moment, and effort isn't going to carry the day in this decision on 3rd Street in Raz. So you kind of want to be loose. But I think a lot of people, we think if you care about something, you should put a lot of effort into it. And I don't know, there's only so hard you can try on 3rd Street in Raz.
Going to riff on willpower a little bit, I think there is like a subsection of player who's like, not to be harsh, but addicted to gambling. And they're just like kind of always looking like, okay, a little over optimistic, calling raises on the button multi-way or peeling the flop. And I think just the idea of like, if I hit my card, I could win a huge pot, you know? And I think there is like people who like, I don't know if it's willpower or just whatever, but they regularly make those kind of mistakes. They're optimistic.
Yeah. I use that term a lot too, optimistic. It's kind of a nice way to explain what's going on when someone's playing too many hands or finding their way into too many creative spots. Bringing back an old segment. Did this with Dean Eggs. Did it with Dvoress, and little known GTO Lab fact, Daniel Dvoress was my guinea pig on this podcast, but it's never been aired. It wasn't good video quality, but Dan gave me the podcast host practice before any episodes. So trivia fact. Anyway, we did Superior Dan, where we figure out of yourself, Daniel Dvoress, Daniel Negreanu, and I'm going to add another one. You know, Daniel Rizai has been playing all the Tritons. He's been playing high stakes. Let's get another Dan in there. Oh, shit, I forgot someone. Jungle Man. Daniel Cates is in there, too. We got Jungle.
He would be deeply offended that he was not on the Dan list. And
yeah, he's on there.
Like at least 4 times a year and maybe more, I get like a DM from Jungle that he's like, "You're in Japan, Dan. I'm in China, Dan. We're going to battle and see who the best Dan is."
That sounds like a very Jungle text. All these Dans, we got to figure out who's the best of you in a bunch of very important topics. I'm going to hit you with something you're competing at, and you tell me who would win, who would be the best at this given topic. Dodgeball.
I would put Dvoress as the #1 seed for dodgeball and myself too.
Okay. Tournament director at the Win. Somebody's replacing Ray Pulford, who is a fantastic tournament director. So you're running everything from the dailies to the big ones. Who's the best tournament director? Everything that entails.
And you're motivated enough to do a great job of it?
You are you, and this is your job.
I'm
going to say you have to do the job, but you all have your current finances and lives aside from that.
I'll go with Rizai. And is that how you say his last name?
I don't know. Rizai. Let us know in the comments, Daniel. Jeopardy contestant.
Not me. I just have too many categories where I'm just like a complete zero. I think Dvoress is just pretty well-rounded. I'm probably going to be skewed to pick him in some stuff since I just know him better than the other guys, but
Fair.
He does need to know a lot about a lot of things.
He does. Compromising.
Rizai.
Foosball.
I'm atrocious. D-Negs is a pool player. I feel like there's some correlation there.
You find them both at bars.
Yeah, I'll go with D-Negs.
Okay.
I am so bad.
Rap battle. Battle rap. However you say
Jungle.
it. Jungle.
Yeah. He'll commit.
Okay. You all have to learn a new instrument starting today, something you've never picked up previously. And you have 20 years to get into the highest status orchestra that you can. Who gets to the highest point with a new instrument, new orchestral instrument?
I saw Jungle play the flute in the Win. It's not going to be him. It's not going to be me. Again, I don't really know him, but I'm just going to go with Rizai, like by process of elimination. And I think of the remaining 3, you can just make the case for any of them.
Fair.
Is lung capacity like a big thing for for instruments, like VO2
Yeah,
max?
some of them. I think, orchestra, we've got a lot of string instruments where it won't be relevant, but it could be.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe it would be like a big edge for Dvoress.
Oh, yeah. Free diving.
Yeah.
All right. You each have 24 hours to create a piece of art, any kind of art. The contest will be judged by Patrick Antonius, anonymous. He doesn't know who created what. Who wins the contest?
D-Negs.
D-Negs. Listening.
Maybe also D-Negs. Maybe a little bit controversial thing to discuss, but like he did the Choice Center thing, which is largely, I don't exactly know what it is, but I think it's about like interacting with people in a healthy way. I don't think I'm a particularly good listener.
It's all right. We've enlisted you to talk today.
Great.
Arguing persuasively.
This is something that I used to be a complete disaster at, and I think I'm now pretty good at. So I'll say myself.
I'm sold. So you just got back from a trip. I know you told me you're in Hawaii, but if I remember, you told me you went to Hokkaido primarily for snowboarding. And you mentioned that you didn't get the best conditions, was what I gathered. But you kind of brought this up, if I followed correctly, about as poker players, we're very understanding of variance. It may hurt, but we take it into account, and we have a pretty good tolerance and feel for its effect. But then in life, that doesn't always carry over. You want to talk about that some?
Yeah. So I was talking about, I was in Japan for 2 weeks, started in Niseko, where it's supposed to be some of the best conditions in the world. It's either my 4th or 5th time going. Do you ski at all?
I am going snowboarding the day after tomorrow for the first time in like 10 years. It's been a while, but yeah.
Where are you going to go?
Salt Lake City.
Oh, it's going to be great. And I actually might be going to Salt Lake City this weekend.
Oh, nice. There we go.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. How much I enjoy it is really correlated to how the conditions are. Like if the conditions are great, like going through powder, I would, as far like, I don't know, it's better than some like MDMA rolls I've had, and you can just do it for hours, and it's just like, this is the best thing. Like, even the sound that the board makes, you're just cruising. You have no concerns about hurting yourself. And then if the conditions are decent, you're like, okay, this is kind of fun. And then when it's like icy and there isn't powder or whatever, it's like, hey, I don't enjoy this.
Yeah.
But was finding that the quality of the turns I was taking was just really linked to like how my mood was in the evening. And even though like objectively the conditions were pretty good, if you like for the rest of the world, for Japan, it was a little underwhelming. Or like there was a day I had so there was a mountain that's like 90 minutes away that I had a friend going to on like, what was supposed to be the big powder day.
Mm-hmm.
We get there, the gondola's closed. So we can go like a quarter of the way up, and like those conditions were great, but you'd be able to have done that for 4 times as long, just cruising through powder. It was like a really eye-opening thing for me, just seeing how much that like your expectations will influence how much you're enjoying something. And I thought it was kind of like you had said in the beginning, I was thinking that as a poker player, I'm kind of equipped to deal with variance, but then it's just like, ooh, my turns were only 8 out of 10. And I expected 11 out of 10. Like, now I'm bummed. Or a similar thing, like if you're doing like too much fine dining, it's no longer like a special thing. And then it's just like, ooh, I got to sit through this meal and eat a bunch. the way that you like perceive things, I think, could make a huge difference. And I guess I expected myself to be a little better at dealing with those swings.
Yeah. I actually, to kind of piggyback that sentiment, I would say that the worst moods I find myself in, or at least the most self-condemnation, is when I feel like I should know better. I should be equipped to handle a situation, like one of these bad variants, like, hey, it's raining on vacation and you're a little sad. And then you're like, why am I so sad? And then it just kind of, spirals downward, where now you're on top of yourself because you kind of have this somewhat perfect expectation of your ability to handle this situation. And it just kind of gets worse and worse.
I mean, being away from home does have a cost, like your sacrifice, like you don't get to sleep in your bed or play your regular tennis or whatever. So if you're in this place and then like you're stuck in a hotel room, which isn't always that nice, like it could be a downer.
Yeah. No, I'm not a big vacation guy, and a lot of it has to do with the expectation. There's kind of an expectation that just about every day on vacation should be at least better than the day you would have spent at home. And I don't know, I kind of like my days at home a lot, so it's a high bar to clear.
Probably quite different with a kid too.
True. Yeah. No, I think for a lot of people, when they take their family on vacation, I talking to my friends who are dads, they don't view it as vacation almost at all. This is work, trying to make sure that everyone has a really good time. If I have a good time in the process, that's great, but it's not really the point of it.
Yeah.
No.
Snowboarding is just like so far and away my favorite thing. If the conditions are great, that like I will sacrifice, like, okay, I'm sleeping in a place that isn't as convenient. I have the food, but it's just like, oh, I get to go through powder for like 5 hours. I'm just like completely giddy and over the moon.
Now you're setting my expectations pretty high. I was pretty low expectation going into this trip.
It's not going to snow until Saturday, but
there we go.
Have you snowboarded before, or like not in many years, you were saying?
Yeah, I probably snowboarded 30 or 40 times, and I haven't done it in about 10 years.
It'll come back quick.
No.
I think I'm also particularly sensitive to like the lack of powder, because I have no fear when I'm riding through powder. Like, if I have a big fall, snow is comfy.
Mm-hmm.
When I don't have that cushion, I'm always thinking about hurting myself, and it just makes it a lot less fun.
Metaphorical and literal cushion. Taking you to the strategy corner.
Right.
What are some of the worst ideas floating around poker today? Some of the biggest misconceptions that you think kind of send people down the wrong path in their journey to get better? Take your time. Tough question.
The first thing that jumps out at me, seeing some of these like ICM pre-flop outputs, and I think they are sometimes just so inhuman. There's one I remember looking at a while ago where it goes like raise, call, and it would have this small blind folding jacks, but pure shoving king 7 suited. And it's just like, this is probably not super helpful in how I'm going to like carry on in this spot,
Precision at its finest.
Yeah, and if either of the players like deviates a little bit, you could just be making like a massive, massive error.
Yep.
I think generally some of the thoughts about ICM are kind of misguided, and I don't think we have a great I don't necessarily think the computer outputs are inspire here,
Do you think it's due to the lack of future game in a lot of sims, or the limitations of what future game looks like right now, or do you think it goes beyond that?
My guess is it just doesn't consider future game efficiently. I've always wondered if you could just take win rates and loss rates, like just pretend that like the big stack is going to be winning 15 BB per 100. See how it might adjust strategies, but then of course, like what's the variance? How likely are they to get all in? It's tough.
Yeah. It sounds like a good template at the start, but then it gets probably similarly complicated.
Yeah.
What do you think in the next 18 months? Do you imagine there's going to be some iteration of strategy that becomes mainstream that would look really funky right now? Like I'm picturing, I don't know, betting pot into 3 players left to act behind you. Do you think anything that just kind of looks pretty strange or difficult right now might become relatively commonplace 18 months from now?
I think people are going to start finding more out of position blocks without the initiative. Like, I think there are just some situations where like the passive player's equity has gone up when like a card that's smaller than a 10 rolls off because the other player is heavyweight in big cards. And I think seeing more of that, or just like, oh, you check call the turn, you come up with the B10 on the river. You had a nice turn block at the without the initiative in the last Triton on the. I don't know if you remember it.
5 bigs is in the big blind, so he's going to have to put in 40% of his stack. One open. Let's see what JJ comes with.
Relatively small 3-bet. Let's worry about Jaffe behind him. Jaffe's in.
Come into effect at all?
Well, win some chip.
Pair. Danny with the 2 overs.
Sure. Play with ICM. He can even do a pretty small size, but leading, which at this point, I think Danny can piece together that the lead means his hand isn't good. So they have a lot of equity to make a play like this. He knows that. Ace Jack.
Oh man, we're watching some elite poker being played here. I mean, whoever wins is guaranteed to be the chip leader.
Ace Queen. And play those as leads as well. If you're going to lead weak stuff, Danny gives up.
Gives up. Jonathan Jaffe scooping a 4.3 million chip pot, vaulting himself up.
I'm like, oh, this
against Danny. Good. Pocket 8s against Ace Jack. That was the one that a lot of people saw. Was it open U7, I flat, hijack 8s, Danny squeezes Ace Jack-O button. This is like 13 left or something. And then I call and we get a low flop, check call, and then I block a low turn.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah.
And it just kind of struck me as like a thing that the computer both would want to do, and it seemed well implemented. And does he shove over your lead or no?
He raises, and I see all 3 as options, and I kind of middled it and called. And then we check a queen river, and I win a big swing pot that, fuck if I know who played it well, who played it bad. Both of us played it bad. Both of us played it well. I don't know.
I'm confident you played it well. I mean, I don't know how much you looked into it after the fact. It
was a really low SPR going to the river. So like there's a case for maybe just shoving over his raise on the turn if I want to continue. It's tough to say.
Those spots are just really tough. And then like the ICM effect. And
yeah. With no ICM, I think it's like pretty clear at that point, almost certainly with my combo to just shove or fold. But that ICM, I was just kind of like, shit, he's still alive. We'll see.
And some people are good at playing rivers. And I think even if like the solver doesn't want to do something, you don't necessarily want to play a hand in a way where like you take away one of your skills. Yeah, I just remember seeing that hand and thinking it was clever, and like one of those things I expect to see more of in the future.
I like a comment you just made about some people are good at playing rivers, and you kind of, all things being equal, maybe don't want to take yourself out of the spot where you can kind of utilize that skill. I think about the inverse and how a lot of players, when they feel like they're up against someone tougher, they keep with this idea of keep the pot smaller, which allows the better player to make more decisions and get to the river with a decision, as opposed to kind of shrinking the SPR and mitigating the skill gap. Do you think that people are getting better at that and playing back at people that they think are tough players? Or do you think that there's still a reluctance to check raise flops when someone feels outmatched?
I think it would probably vary a lot based on the stakes that you're playing. I wouldn't be surprised if you're playing like the WPT 3500 in Florida and you're deep in it, if you can get away with murder and people aren't trying to like find those spots against you. I think as people get more studied and just more confident, I think people who've been playing poker for a long time aren't going to like intentionally make the wrong play. And if you are just confident, like you have to 3-bet pre-flop with like a certain percentage of hands, you're going to be more apt to do it. I also probably think it's a thing that goes like, it varies a lot player to player, and maybe like the metagame is going to be swinging a little bit. Cop out answer. Oh, metagame.
No. Yeah, I follow. Here's a question about metagame. We play in these small field tournaments where at any given point, like 10% or more of the field is being live streamed. So our hands show up a lot. When I think about people who make really good decisions on the river and your name has come up on that list and I agree with it, I think, yeah, you can just have a really good thought process, not choke, stuff like that. But there's also something to be said for these small errors, like you mentioned earlier about, maybe not being super sharp on your small blind range in a given spot. They're way less important, and your ability to know where you're at in the metagame with this player becomes much more important. So essentially I'm asking, do you still try to play each spot in a vacuum, or are you sometimes saying, hey, this is a 25K and 2 days from now I'm going to play 100K with this guy, and I think these two bet sizes are relatively similar here. Maybe I don't show him that I ever use this bet size that I might want to save for a different buy-in or something similar. That's just one, concoction.
While I am pondering, I was in a pro chess league where I was like the amateur player, and I was paired up against like a grandmaster, and I was preparing for him. I knew what move he was going to play as white. I came up with a response, and literally on the first move, I just play the wrong move order. And it's just like, how do I do this? I spent an hour looking up this line where like I play the king pong out first, and then I bring out my horse, and it's just like the super technical mechanic, just like.
All right, I want to put you on the therapist couch now. My dad's a shrink. What do we think's going on? How does that happen? I'm so curious what your theories are on why that may have, this is just like not a critical thinking. Is there self-sabotage? What's happening?
In a lot of situations, the two moves are completely interchangeable. One is a move that I'm like used to playing, and it's almost like muscle memory. I guess I was just like, yeah, I'm going to go here. He's going to go here. And then I'm in this situation. And then by doing a different first move, I gave him the option to deviate, and I took it away. Maybe also like lack of focus, because I'm like, this decision, it's already done. The game hasn't even started yet, and just like not of like ready to like not ready to execute, because I'm like, oh, we're not playing yet. We'll be playing soon. So maybe like a little bit more intensity to start. I've always been a little bit aloof, absent-minded too. So dealing with that.
How'd the rest of that game go?
He played better than me and won, but it wasn't. I actually had pretty good results in that league. I really enjoyed playing it. I mean,
were you able to? I mean, you make this mistake, you can't fathom in the moment. How
the
do I
two moves are the same EV.
Okay.
Like completely.
Like you weren't hard on yourself. You were just okay, shifting into this new strategy. Here we go.
Yeah. And it's also like the original moves, or like the moves I usually make. So I was like comfortable with it, and I was like just very much in a game. I was able to find humor in it. It's nice when you're playing games when you're like, I'm expected to win like 6% of the time. If I lose, nobody cares if I'm playing a grandmaster. But if you win, it's a great situation. I think in competition in general, being like the huge underdog has tons of benefits. And I find myself, like in my chess career, I've knocked out like a disproportionate amount of grandmasters, where at my level, that's supposed to be pretty rare. But I'm also quite live to like be playing someone who's 2 levels below me. I have a good position. They just make a move. It's like, ooh, this guy doesn't understand like what's going on here. And then I'm just not focused, and I don't beat somebody that I should like beat 98% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I have had some plays that I've been like excited to whip out. But like when you have come across these sort of things, they happen infrequently enough. I think there are differences in playing different stakes, but for the most part, I like if you're saying, ooh, bluff less at 10Ks than 100Ks. I mean, like that's pretty easy to come across. Yeah, I can't really think of an example of a play that I want to make that I think it's better to like keep in your back pocket. You know, like those situations just come up so infrequently. And I also enjoy that part of the game where it's just like, ooh, I discovered like this funky turn lead. I'm excited to like play it and see what happens, you know?
Sounds like the chess player in you.
Yeah, I find it interesting, and I want to make the right move, even if I'm not necessarily convinced it's making me more money.
I want to make the chaotic move, even if I'm not convinced it's making me more money. I want to put us both in chaos and then kind of see how we get out of it.
Yes, it's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. Question I have about studying, what your study regimens look like these days. You said you kind of, when you feel like you have some time, try to get yourself to hit the books a bit. So what is studying for Dan today? And generally speaking, what are some efficient study patterns you think for people, what they should be studying more of that they maybe don't, tournament players, and what people spend too much time on or is not a very efficient use of time?
So given I don't coach anyone, I'm not super aware of what other people are doing. So I have a hard time going off of that. Far and away, my favorite way to study is play a hand and the Triton. When it's Triton, you can just save the screenshot, text it to yourself, and then just look it up. I personally find a huge difference if there's like an emotional connection to a hand. And I think like the outputs like become ingrained more easily.
It's like a springboard to more learning.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, ace, king, you're supposed to put in the big bet on the turn and it's too thin to check on the river. And then just like the real example, of course, you could always just be doing that. You could play infinite hands against the solver, but like the real instance, I just find much easier to absorb the lesson.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Something I think that I've done well in the last year was I found I was making a disproportionate amount of mistakes in a certain spot. And for like the month leading up to Monte Carlo, I was just drilling that spot for like 20 minutes a day, you know? And I think I've gone from like that spot being a weakness to at least average, and maybe I'm pretty good at it now. It's like kind of hard to say like what other people know and what they don't, but
all right, what's the spot? You're at least average. It feels like it's not a strategic giveaway at this point.
U8, U7, fucking I was just not good at it. Like,
yeah, single raise spot.
Yeah, and it was just like,
especially so unimportant. Who cares? You can't suck that bad.
Why are you gonna study the early positions? Like like the 8-handed, you shouldn't even be at the fucking table. You know, like
who calls U7?
Oh no, I wasn't saying those two spots playing against each other. I'm like,
I thought you generally meant like U8 opens, U7 flats. I'm like, how much time did you spend on that? Shit.
No, I was just saying I think I historically neglected those two positions, and then I just had a Triton where I made like maybe like a 2 big blind mistake where like I called off on the river where like I got another hand on that trip wrong in those positions, and I'm just like, you know what? I've always kind of just like neglected these positions because
this is EP versus button or EP versus
big blind
versus big blind.
Single raise pots, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so when you say a triple, you meant check raise barrel off. Okay.
So I was just like, you know what? This is just a weakness of mine, and then I think I've improved a lot at it. I guess when you were generally talking about advice for people to improve, if you can identify your weaknesses, knowing what it is to work at it becomes way easier.
How do you feel you deal with mistakes and I guess forgiving yourself, not letting it make you a worse player, not letting it keep you off the felt? Are you someone who's reasonably hard on yourself or can kind of let things go pretty quick?
It really varies a lot. I go through periods where it's just like, hey, tried my best. I did what I thought was right. I also do go through periods where I'm quite hard on myself. I think I used to be a lot harder on myself, and I generally am better with it.
What helped in that process?
At a certain point, my self-worth stopped being dictated on how good I was at poker. I would say going back to like the early like 2012, 2014 years, I was dealing with a lot of depression, and I kind of thought that the way that I would make myself happy would be get better at poker. And then it's like, okay, win this much money, win this tournaments. And then like, I was the number 1 ranked GPI player, which is something I was going for. And I was one of the best players in the world. And kind of as a test, I just had an open offer to be like, hey, if anybody wants to cross-book tournaments, like, and people weren't taking me up on that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah. But then I'm like, oh, I am now this really great poker player and everything else in my life is the same. Like it doesn't especially matter. Not having your self-worth tied up in such a thing. And of course, I think thinking it is the most important thing is probably part of the reason I had so much success. Like I really put a lot into it and I was hard on myself, and the fact that I cared, I think, came through in my play, but I also don't necessarily think it was like the best way for me to live my life.
What changed at that point when you kind of realized, okay, I kind of have what I want poker wise, and yet I'm not feeling top notch? What did you do about it?
I saw LuckyChewy and I just remember thinking that I want my brain to work a lot more like his brain. And when I told him that I was like very depressed, he said to me that he's experiencing like so much love that he wishes he could just like share it with me. And he said it like more poignantly than that, you know? And yeah. I'm just like, exactly why you're the person I'm talking to about that. Like, it's beautiful. Like,
yeah.
I kind of just went through like, okay, read WebMD. Like, what are the things that you should be doing if you're depressed? The first time I meditated, I had tried to get a meditation practice going and it never stuck. And then the first time I did this like guided meditation thing, like I went into it like rolling my eyes and it was gonna like some hippie bullshit, you know? And I'm just in the middle of it and I'm just like, this is what, like, I thought it was a more intense effect than like some mushroom trips I've had, you know? I felt myself like grieve my dad's death from like 5-6 years prior. And it was just like, like, this is great. I've more or less meditated every day since. And the last year I've gotten a little bit sloppier with the practice, but like I would say over like the next decade, I probably did it over 99% of days.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that had been a big game changer. I guess I discussed mushrooms a little bit. I was convinced that like psychedelics could have a I read some literature that suggested that like psychedelics could be good in that way. And like a couple of years into this journey, I was at Burning Man and I took a large dose of MDMA and I felt myself having like this life-changing experience where like previously the narrator in my head was super harsh to myself and like I'm a little resistant to like repeat it, but like I was saying very bad things to myself. Like you would never talk to anybody else that way. And I kind of just, up until that point, I think deep down, I was convinced I was like a stone idiot where it's like, okay, I am good at like certain things, but I also have like these big shortcomings and I kind of just focused on them. I had this kind of realization that like of course, I'm not a fucking idiot. I have some strong gifts. And while I was going through this feeling, I had the thought that, okay, I was able to become like a truly great poker player. I would say definitionally that means I am like more likely than the average person to be able to like make a big difference in the world. And that's the night that I came up with the idea for Double Up Drive.
When was that?
Burning Man, like 2016.
I remember you wrote a post after going to Burning Man once. I don't know where it was, but I came across it, and I have basically never been attached to any poker media, so I don't know how I came across your Burning Man post, but I did, and I wrote you about it. I really liked it. I thought, I don't know, I don't think we'd ever texted before, but I was like, oh, that was a really good read. Thanks for sharing. I don't remember too much of the content, but I wonder if it was 2016.
Plus or minus 2 years.
Gotcha.
It's still out there. I think if you guys Google Dan Smith Burning Man blog.
Okay, so it was a blog. All right. I'm wondering how I came across it. I don't know.
I think it was just Google Docs. Like, and I think the fact that I wrote about it kind of helped grow the charity angle. Like,
yeah, that was my first awareness of it, and I remember donating that year.
Thank you. It went like a little bit viral, like various media things picking it up, and then a year later, Martin Crowell was like, "Hey, I saw your post. I love what you're doing. Here's $1 million to like to distribute to these like good causes." And then it became a thing where it's just, okay, now we are doing this, not just my own money, but like outside money. And then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've been doing it for like 10 years now.
That's awesome. Question about charity and poker. I mean, not poker really, in public. I feel like I've always been very self-conscious about anything that is near altruism, where I think it's right to display things publicly because it builds momentum and it sends virtue signal is like the bad word where people are like, oh, you're just trying to get credit or whatever. But realistically, like that's the component that kind of makes things happen is I respect Dan's showing me what he's doing with his money. I'm going to follow that to some degree. And I wonder if you have any self-consciousness about basically, advertising charity in public and the kind of target it can put on your back for people who, for whatever reasons, I think mostly feeling shitty about not doing better things with their money, shit on a person who, whatever, wears a patch, let's say, in this case, your own charity.
I did try to wear my own charity shirt, but I didn't get my webcam quite right.
No, we're catching most of it. Basically, are you self-conscious at all about it?
Not really. Like, yes, part of the reason I started giving money to charity was in you go on WebMD, I think it's going to mention that like, hey, like giving money to other people is good for your brain, you know? I have seen some people make the argument that, it's something that's supposed to be done in private. I have given millions of dollars to charity, and I think the fact that I have been vocal about it has been like significantly more impactful than the dollar amount. Granted, like my experience isn't super normal, but typical rather. But if you have an issue with it, then honestly, I don't really care. And I guess going back to some of like the mental health stuff that I spend a lot of time doing, is that on a good day, I don't care what other people think about me. And like, if this is something that you have an issue with, like, I stopped caring about the thoughts in my own head, you know? And of course I'm not like perfect about it, but like I went through a phase where like the thoughts in my own head were like a strong and like influential like part of my day-to-day experience. I got to a point where I could kind of release that. So I don't care about my thoughts. The idea of caring about like some guy that I'm never going to meet, like his thoughts, like who cares?
Yeah. When I think about people who are, we'll call it openly charitable, it comes together with vegans and vegetarians in my head, where I think that it scares a lot of people. It's intimidating. I'll take, for example, I mean, I can just speak about vegetarianism, where I'm not. I eat a lot of meat. I don't even eat clean meat. I'll eat fast food sometimes, more often than sometimes. I think I'm an ethical disaster when it comes to meat. I think like it would be very, very hard to justify my relationship to meat. And every time I see a vegetarian, I'm not angered at them. I'm impressed by them, but it's a reminder that I'm being shitty. And that's my thought when it comes to people who are openly charitable, is that it can be this kind of reminder that can make people uncomfortable. And I was just curious if you've kind of felt that dynamic at all. And it sounds like it doesn't really bother you, which is nice if you have.
How do you feel about the idea of ethical offset?
Don't know what it means.
So like, let's just pretend you aren't as diligent as you would like to.
Like buying carbon offsets. Yeah. Sorry.
Or like with regards to animals, like it doesn't.
Poorly. I feel poorly about it.
Like you don't think logically it checks out?
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope, kind of. That's how I would put it. I think that it's kind of like, play it out in a different way. A person can be an asshole to everyone they come in contact with if they give so much money to charity that offsets their prickly personality or whatnot. I think that's so asymmetrical, where you could say like, hey, this is how much damage you're doing by flying on a private jet, and this is how much good you're doing by planting X number of trees. Maybe you can kind of be more direct, but intuitively, it strikes me as bad and not good. Not great.
I think it is a slippery slope. I am currently of the belief that it doesn't take that much money to make a large difference to certain animal charities, to the point where like a few $1,000s could like per year would like more than offset like any personal eating habits. I think there is some merit to the idea that like some of the animal infrastructure in the US is just like, I was going to say inhumane. I guess the word, maybe it doesn't work. But like they're treated poorly, you know? Yeah. And also just like the thing that I have for myself is I generally try to be quite aware of the meat that I am buying personally. I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, we've started.
I do agree with you.
Also eat fast food. What are you saying?
I do agree with you. The idea of like ethical offset could totally be a slippery slope. Like, oh yeah, my hobby is like murdering people, but if I only murder 10 people a year and I donate $1 million a year, I'm saving 3,000 people, and the offset, like, no. Generally being a good person is key.
Yeah, I've got an argument that just popped into my head regarding offsets being a problem. I think most people would say like the gap of inequality, between the haves and have-nots has gotten pretty out of control. Well, with these ethical offsets, you can have more reason for having more money because you have more bullshit you want to pay for. I want to pay for this bad behavior and that unethical behavior. Therefore, it kind of continues to encourage the idea of people who should pretty much have all their needs met, continuing to want to have more money, which is going to have them kind of pull strings in a direction that's going to keep more people in poverty and less middle class.
On like a more general sentiment, like the idea of making money, like at a certain, like 2016, maybe there was a time when I was playing like a bit less poker because it's like, hey, I made this pile of money and that's cool. Do I want to keep playing a zero-sum game? I think like someone's personal relationship with money, and it could totally change over time, can make a difference. And then for me, like it gave giving money to charity did give me some comfort in the fact that I'm spending you only get to experience life once, and I'm spending my time playing a zero-sum card game that I'm already quite good at, like it's a thing I've given a lot of thought to about like whether I want to keep playing and why I think that is.
I agree. I think one of the interesting things, when you were talking about depression and before you brought up WebMD says, hey, was it giving money to causes you believe in or just generally helping people?
Generally helping other people and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's, it sounds pretty obvious, but in my first kind of bouts with depression or whatever depressive states I felt, that was a lot of what my dad suggested to me was just help people. And yeah, it's kind of the only renewable source that I've found that doesn't have as diminishing returns as most things do, whether they be, drugs, sex, materialism, etc. And the thing about it is, it doesn't really, again, the magnitude, the difference between winning a small poker tournament, winning a big tournament isn't usually like 20x the feeling. And I feel the same way about small acts of kindness and helping someone compared to massive acts. You don't, it doesn't seem to connect. Like let's just say giving $1,000 to a charity, not a huge sum, but compared to, I don't know, smiling at a few people and talking to them for 20 seconds when you think it would brighten their day. It's not $1,000 act. And yet they feel relatively similar to me. I don't know. It's just something I think about in terms of for those people out there who don't have a lot of money and don't feel very comfortable giving away too much. I've always liked the Jewish approach to charity, which is it's just about giving something, that the amount is secondary. And that's not true when it comes to the global good you're doing, but for feeling better about yourself in the moment and for kind of helping you when you're not feeling well, I think any acts of kindness that you can kind of display towards others is a really good way out.
I think generally being a good person has huge compounding effects. So yeah, not escalating the situation at the grocery store when like somebody's a little bit of a jerk to you, and like I'm from New Jersey, I could be combative. I think generally treating people well makes a huge difference in the world. I assume you're familiar with the David Foster Wallace piece, This Is Water.
Oh, I love it. I played it in the KULEV podcast. So good. I was thinking about the grocery store.
Yeah, I think being kind to people can make a huge difference. I'm like,
yeah, benefit of the doubt too. It's easy to make enemies of people and see them for their worst sides. It's a much more mature and difficult task to kind of see see them as three-dimensional beings who have their own problems.
Yeah. And sometimes you find out that someone's been dealing with some like really heavy shit for a long time. And it's just like, they're probably handling it better than I would have. Like,
yeah. I mean, that's one of the, we just had an election, and obviously the country is very divided. One of the bigger issues you hear about social media amplifying problems, but one of the issues is you can't get away from hearing about somebody's political opinions or their political status is sometimes something before you've even met someone or had any kind of meaningful interaction. So it colors everything, as opposed to, pre-social media, you might have, played a few games of pool with someone or discussed, your children's hobbies for 3 hours before you'd ever touched on who you voted for.
I think generally knowing somebody's thoughts is like a pretty intimate thing. And with social media, you just get a lot of some people's thoughts, and that used to not be the case. Part of the resistance I have to I don't do many podcasts because it's people knowing how I think about certain things. And then now I might have the interaction of they know how I feel about this thing, but I don't know that they know. I guess sharing your thoughts and your beliefs could just be like an intimate thing, and in some cases, like people, I guess in some cases when people feel very differently about things, then it could just like lead to bad blood, challenges, whatever.
Yeah. I think at our heart, most of us, probably all of us, we want to be known. Some people want to be known just by a few that they're really close, but I mean, like knowing what's in your heart and what's in your head. But there's something uncomfortable about a lot of people knowing what's in your head, and you not knowing what they do and don't know, what they have or haven't heard from you in a public sphere. Definitely an uncomfortable thing.
I generally have a different viewpoint as like I was saying, I don't put like a ton of value in thoughts necessarily. So like, okay, a person could have this thought about like a certain political belief. It's when their actions, like, hey, they feel strongly enough about this belief that they're going to spend their time like promoting it. Like, okay, this is no longer a thought. This is like a core value of you as a person,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I mean, judging people on their actions more than their thoughts seems like a much more fair way to do things.
I also just thought of one thing while going back to depression. I just want to say that in my experience, I think the most reliable thing is exercise. And I would encourage people who are struggling, at least in my experience, when I've been having like the tough to get off the couch kind of days, if I have to have my 3 coffees to lift weights, I get it in. And then for me, I just find that if I'm like exercising hard, the mental health generally rebounds. And I also just think there's a lot of like effects of like, at least if you're getting in your good exercise and maybe you're eating some like reasonable food, you could limit some of like the negative self-talk about like being a worthless piece of shit,
Yeah. I think there's nowhere that I'm a bigger believer in momentum than mental health in terms of spiraling upwards and spiraling downwards. And no matter how many times, no one seems to believe it enough, the difference in your mental state, how it can be just laying in bed versus getting up and going for a walk, let alone lifting weights, just something to kind of break the inertia and you're just all of a sudden 30 minutes later realizing I'm about as content as I normally am as a person, even though I was pretty sure I was in a death spiral that couldn't be broken by even some of the greatest things on earth happening to me.
Yeah. Exercise, I think, does wonders. And I guess I'll also just tout like cold water and like saunas is like a way to like shock your system.
I wanted to ask you about that. So you have a cold plunge. The only time I've ever done a cold plunge is at your place. And you have a sauna, very nice sauna. You do both regularly. You lift weights regularly. Kind of curious how long those have been in your regimen, if you'd recommend them to other people or if it's just a personal preference. What are your thoughts around the three?
I know you do 3 recommendations, and one of my recommendations is going to be like a willingness to try new things. I think it's like a great trade in terms of like for me personally, I would have gone down this meditation route. I think everyone should be able to find a type of exercise that they enjoy that isn't work for them, you know? Like I don't have to play tennis. I get to play tennis. I love it. Like even lifting weights, I love the way that I feel afterwards. Like if I have a day with nothing planned, like I look forward to it. I think everyone can find something that they like, whether some people are into rock climbing, some people running. Like for me, like the idea of like going for a jog is like ridiculous. I'm chasing the ball. Now it's great.
That's exactly it. I'm with you.
And like you mentioned, like the sauna and the cold plunge, for me, saunaing before bed is just like a complete game changer. And like, I don't have to do it. I go in there and I feel great afterwards, like very reliably. I think sometimes when dealing with challenging emotions, like, okay, like, why am I anxious about this thing? And like, maybe that's a thing to explore. And sometimes it's like, I got a final table in an hour. I'm not about to unpack this. You jump in the cold water and it's just like, that anxiety isn't there because your body is like, holy shit, what's going on here? So like the 3 things that we just mentioned, for me work great. And just in terms of like quality of life, like I was mentioning snowboarding, after getting fit, those sort of activities are just so much more fun.
There's a pattern that emerges in my head. I don't know, I'm creating a narrative around your activities, but when I think of sauna, cold plunge, lifting weights, I think of 3 manageable challenges that you've overcome time and again: lifting the weight, staying in the cold plunge, staying in the sauna, pushing your body a little bit, but in a variance-free way, where in poker you can do everything right and you fail 9 times out of 10 as a tournament player, far more than that. And you probably don't have a very high failure rate with sauna, cold plunge, and lifting weights, and yet there's a sense of achievement, I would imagine, at least with the lifting weights. I don't know if you still feel that with cold plunge and sauna, but I can remember for me in the early days, whenever I'm not a neat freak, I'm not a particularly clean person, but whenever I had a terrible night of poker when I was living on my own as a professional, I would just clean the place top to bottom, and it just made me feel good to do something that was going to help my life, that was kind of variance free.
I think that is a great observation and is like nail on the head. You get in the cold plunge, you've already won. Even if you get out after a minute, like, great, you did a thing that's good for you. You feel good. I'm aware that like both things are like super like hyped and trendy right now, but that's not, sometimes things are trendy for a good reason. And for me personally, like Like, how'd you feel when you got out of the cold plunge?
Accomplished, but you guys didn't tell me how. Like, I thought there was going to be like, okay, you did it. I thought there was an amount of time, and no one tapped me or whatever, and I was just like, Jesus, was I supposed to have gotten out like 5 minutes ago?
Yeah,
But,
I could
yeah,
see
I
that
felt
being
accomplished.
like a scary thing, but like I get out of it, I'm like, I could wrestle a bear right now, you know? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I felt accomplished. Yeah.
And I think having that sort of experience regularly is probably good for you for a bunch of reasons, and probably like healthy for you too. Like, not even just like the mental aspects, but like likely good for you.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important when you achieve a high level of success in one field to be able to kind of place yourself back at the beginner level in another field and do something else that you're mediocre at, and kind of be at different stages in the pecking order of various things that are a part of your life. Because if you feel the need to be at the top and like an absolute crusher, you're going to have a very limited life. There's just very few things, no matter how talented you are, that you can kind of be near the top at one time. Feels like variance free wins like hiking and cold plunge and, I don't know, just creating art for yourself, or playing music is probably a better example, seem very important to kind of integrate into a healthy, balanced life.
I think finding things that are good for you, wonderful. And like you were saying, like the variance free accomplishment is huge. I don't know how obvious this is, but I'm like a complete competitive freak. And poker actually doesn't like scratch that competitive itch for me, because you show up and all you can do is try your best. Like, the results don't matter. Like, I've won tournaments before and not even been that happy, because it's just like more relief, like, okay, I'm playing this guy, I'm better than, like, I'm supposed to win. But I love the act of competition, be it 3 minutes in the cold plunge, or if I'm playing like my 3-0 men's tennis league, like in that moment, this is the very important thing. I also think a lot comes down to like having moments where you're like truly present, like the outside world doesn't exist. I feel great during and after those things. And for me, like playing tennis is really, during a tennis match, there's nothing else going on.
Yeah, that resonated a lot for me when you were saying that poker doesn't really scratch that itch. It doesn't for me either. I think if you're playing online, you're playing 12 tables, or you're playing the same guy 3 tables of heads up, that would absolutely scratch the itch for me. If I'm playing the same person on multiple tables of heads up, I feel like I'm competing at a pretty high level. But if I'm playing even a Triton, I don't know, most of the time, twiddling my thumbs, watching 2 regs in a hand, they're probably going to play it well, not going to pay attention. It's like there's a lot of time where you could be doing something competitive. You could be looking for the smallest read on this guy that you've played the last 5 years with. The returns are really small. The time horizon for when you're going to be able to leverage this tiny piece of info that you may have picked up might be like 3 months away before you get a chance to play a hand where it's relevant. You and I might play all day. I might even be on your direct left, and we play almost no interesting competitive pots. Everything was kind of standard. You opened King 10-0, I 3-bet, you folded. And I don't know, if we play 2 points of tennis, even if there's a decent disparity between the competitors, there's plenty to compete over. And like every single point, poker, yeah, especially live poker, I'm not going to say it's not a competitive thing, but I totally get where you're coming from, not feeling like the itch is necessarily scratched. And I think sometimes some players, and I could definitely be in this camp, can try to scratch that itch by making a little bit more out of what's going on. I've been accused of playing heads up against the whole table, for example.
That's cute.
Yeah.
You mentioned how I sometimes play on edibles, and it is something that I could find more like intrigue from poker sometimes if I'm stoned, and like I don't do it all of the time, but then just sometimes I do like I think like on a good day you could think like it's very easy. Oh, the turn size doesn't matter here. I'm like, okay, maybe that's right. Like the EV difference is small, but like, okay, this guy chose this size. Like sometimes you could be deep in it, deeply interested in it, you know?
Yeah, I think your ability to tell stories can kind of be augmented by weed. And sometimes those stories are really wrong and you just feel like an idiot, but sometimes you're spot on in a way that your sober self was taking in a lot of different information at once, and your stone self, or maybe not stone, maybe just a little bit high, kind of picks up on exactly the right story and really dives deep on it.
The thought of like, hey, I don't think this guy is going to bluff me in this sort of situation right now, like more easily than like come to the thought, like given I've spent so much energy over the years, like training the solver part of my brain. It's the primary voice in like most hands I play, you know, and sometimes like, okay, it is less important than this guy's playing huge stakes for him or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, you're high and you're picturing him at dinner with his family. He's got 4 kids. You can see it all. You're like, this guy's not, it's the case money. He's not putting it in. No, he's got to put bread on the table.
Sometimes, you know.
Sometimes, you know. All right.
You talked about pain earlier, and I would say in like those situations when you're intentionally deviating and you're just wrong, like, oh, this guy's not going to bluff me in this situation. And then he bluffs you. I can find that more painful, but then I'm also like rationally aware that like, of course, exploits aren't going to be 100%. Like you should be wrong quite regularly.
I'm a big proponent of when someone shows you a hand you never would have fathomed before. Like you and I do a full breakdown on a mystery hand, and we account for bluffs, we account for value, but that bluff, that wasn't, no, I didn't even think he had that after the flop, let alone whatever. Those should make a really big impression on you. Just the times that you were 100% wrong. It doesn't mean you made the wrong decision, of course, but sometimes we get too sure of the feedback that we get, especially like when people muck their cards and you never see some of the bluffs that you might have otherwise.
Yeah. Like, okay, the guy 4-bet ace-5 suited and then barreled off. Like, sure. But sometimes it's like a much more intricate and you're like, okay, yeah. Like you were saying, like, I didn't think on the flop he could have that such that he wouldn't even get here with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is one of the great benefits I've gotten from coaching all different players, is hearing someone be like, you know, this doesn't happen anymore, but say 5 years ago, hijack opens and they fold Jack-9 suited in the big and some complete non-IC. I'm like, why did you do that? Table was really soft. It was Dan Smith who opened. He's really good. I don't want to play him out. What else are people doing? And, you know, like if you're not in touch with, you know, players of various levels, you don't realize how often insane stuff happens where someone just folded 10s to your 3-bet, you know, and it's like, it was unfathomable to you. And now you're kind of working with a completely different information set.
Being in form, like, yeah, I mean, coaching is one way to get that. Also, if you're just like playing like the $3,500 WPTs regularly, you're going to have like a much better idea of like stuff that people do, you know? And if you haven't played those stakes in a while, you just really don't know what to expect.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a constant evolution and you just don't know where the poker meta is at these different buy-in levels.
Yeah.
So I picked an old hand for us to break down. This is the 100K one drop. I'm going to fold the 720 here, but stacks, I'm going to have them for you because they're important. We're at a final table. Let me read them off for you. I have 78 bigs. Michael Lim has 26 bigs. TVK has 22. Ponikov's here on the button with 46 big blinds. Aaron Lightborn in the small blind folds with 28, and you're going to pick up the pocket jacks with 26 big blinds. So yeah, let's just start off pre-flop. I can't imagine, you do end up going for 3-bet. I can't imagine you contemplated shoving this for 26 at a final table. What do you think is the worst pocket pair that seems like a slam dunk 3-bet?
I agree with you. Jackson isn't even close. I think with 9s, I would be considering my options.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So,
I alluded to like some of the ICM outputs before, and I also do think it could be like quite sometimes. I guess maybe this isn't necessarily one of them, but there are just some times where like the outputs are kind of ridiculous, where they like don't play any flats, But here, if I make it 225, I'm going to get flatted quite a lot.
mm-hmm. Yeah. You go to 300, so 6 big blinds, and Ponikovs makes the call with ace-9 suited. So far, seem pretty standard to you?
Yeah. Doesn't seem like the right kind of hand to want to jam and can't fold.
Queen, 8 on the flop. I'm eyeing up your owl here. Definitely want that boy. You've turned it away from me. I'm trying to get it. I do believe I tried turning it towards me a couple times, and you were like, no, not happening, bud. So owl's facing forward and
possibly facing my opponent. I don't know if I don't remember. I do go through periods where like I have it staring people down.
Why not have a couple more eyes on Ponikovs? I mean, that jumpsuit's already attracting a lot of eyes. So
I wasn't going to comment on it, but he's making a statement.
He's a flashy man. Gotta love it. Queen, 8. How are you approaching this flop?
The first thing that I am thinking about is whether like the queens are generally good for me or bad for me. Like, I think I have ace queen suited, but I think ace queen off may well just be a jam pre-flop.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also just think the SPR is low enough that like the trips disadvantage might not be a huge deal. And I would assume that I'm pushing enough equity that I'm coming out with a high C-bet strategy here.
Yeah. I wonder if you think about one of the kind of general heuristics I've used when you're 3-betting big blind versus button or really big blind versus anywhere is what's the lowest pocket pair I'm value 3-betting. And then usually I'll have at least some amount of offsuit of that card. So, you are 3-betting queens. Would you say it's fair to imagine you have some queen X offsuit?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Just as like guess, like maybe queen 9 offsuit type of, but like.
Mm-hmm. Have some equity against the 8s, 7s, etc.
Yeah. Maybe some queen 10-0, queen jack sort of thing.
Gotcha. So you go for small bet, and this I think is the first really interesting decision is what do you do as Ponikovs? We've got no backdoor, but it's a very small bet. We're looking at 1/5 pot. No, a little 1/6. No, a little in between. This is like B20. So yeah, I mean, I'm wondering immediately I'm seeing no backdoors, but then I'm also thinking probably dominating a lot of your bluffs. What do you think about Ponikov's decision to call this bet?
I think it's probably close. I would predict fold, and he just has better continues, and I would imagine like having a king high backdoor flush draw, I think would be better than like the added ace high equity here. Ponikov's is a bit of an acrobat, so I don't think he is approaching the spot and like what is the best continue here. He's just really out here trying to guess, and I think he's done reasonably well at it.
You think he's guessing, is Dan over or under bluffing pre-flop, and that it has to do with that?
Yeah, or in both generally and maybe in this exact moment.
Got it.
I mean, also, it's not an easy fold to make if you're not like confident in it,
Can't be that bad as a call.
It can't be that bad. Sometimes these hands are just like, maybe not this one, but like sometimes you have these continues and they're worth like more than you think, he has a backdoor straight going on. Maybe like we were saying, if he is ahead of bluffs, it's a small bet, but yeah, I think it's a flop fold.
Yep. So right away, I mean, I think most of the people watching this podcast wouldn't fall into this trap, but 5, certainly 10 years ago, a lot of people's standard play here, if they did find the 3-bet pre, would be, all right, if I'm bad, I'm bad, but time to shove, which is not at all what you do. You go for check. Curious about your thoughts between checking and betting small to medium again.
Something that I'm a little bit slow to respond to is like, okay, which suit are my jacks, like relative to like blocking the queen jack suited. So I kind of have to like, especially like, okay, I guess my suits are the right ones for blocking queen jack suited. Yeah. And maybe, and then I take a step backwards. I don't think he calls queen jack off pre-flop, right?
I would think not. I wouldn't.
So then, okay, it is a situation where like having the appropriate blockers, like we were talking a little bit of reasons we don't like poker, but like there is plenty of beauty in the game here where it's just like, okay, what are the good suits? And then like, does it even matter? Is it a thing you want to randomize? I think my hand is generally strong enough to check here. I don't think he's going to. If I bet 300K here, I would expect him to fold. I also just think after I would imagine I play somewhat passively on the turn in this situation, especially if I'm assuming that like if I'm operating under the assumption that he folds ace 9, no backdoor. Visually, check seems quite reasonable. Of course, I'd be more interested in checking, say, I don't want to say of course, because like maybe there is a reason where with aces unblocking continues, but like I do think aces would be a better check, and then like their jack 10, jack 9 suited's likely going to bluff me for stacks. Checking seems like it has some merit.
Ponikov's choose to check back. Any thoughts there?
Seems like the right hand class to check back. Like I'm not going to be really folding pairs. Betting seems kind of, it seems kind of in between. He wants to bluff worse. Get value with better. I mean, let's just pretend he's like, okay, Dan isn't allowed to raise. Do I want to bet like 100,000 to try to like show down on the end? And it's just like, not even in that instance, it's not like super exciting.
Okay. SPR 1, pretty nice river offsuit 5. I mean, everything's offsuit. What are your thoughts at this stage? show you what you did, just in case you don't remember. You go 500 with 375 back.
I think there is a lot of value in staying in the tournament, and you want to like determine what the amount is. If I bet 500 and lose, and then okay, I posted 25K, like 350K is like a sizable stack that's worth quite a lot, and I expect like that ability to have the getting to leave myself those chips behind, I would predict outweighs the benefit of like the toy game theory output of like betting bigger being higher EV.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose something that is worth thinking about in some of these situations, there are people like when you bet the non all-in amount, you're kind of free rolling yourself because like maybe they only will ever jam better and not have bluffs, but you're not confident enough to like fold two aces here, you know? So I think that is at least something that is like worthy of consideration. Like, okay, if your opponent chooses to put the rest in, like, how does your strategy do against that?
Yeah. Are you saving anything? How confident are you in that fold?
And I would not have Ponikovs in the category of guys who are never bluffing here for 375 more, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
I think he will do it if he thinks it's the right hand or the situation will work.
So let's go to Ponikovs. Be curious to hear his thoughts, but curious what you come up with for reasons why he might call here.
I think it's just an inaccurate call unless he just thought I looked like I was bluffing.
Do you think he's reading something really different into your turn strat? Could it possibly be that he just would never check something like jacks on the turn and you're kind of aces or quad queens or bluff? I'm kind of wondering because I'm just thinking like the 4 and the 5 both kind of made a bunch of your bluffs. What do you have left? They're mostly like ace 2, king 3.
Yeah, this just doesn't really feel like the right one to call. Like, I don't think his hand is really working in such a way unless he came into like the story of like, oh, like you were saying, like thinking that it has to be aces if he's behind sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Or just has you so dialed into 3-betting king 6, king 7 every time, etc. Or very high frequency, I guess.
Yeah. I am inclined to say like I would expect this river to be a little bit of a misstep. I've had like 4 big all-ins against Ponikovs over the last couple of years, and I think in like I've got it all in good each time, and he's just like drilled me. And I made a comment to him about how like you have fucked me a bunch of times, and I've never gotten to fuck you back, and I look forward to it. And he was like, "Okay, but in the ace-9 hand, I did fuck myself." So I think he's
okay.
Also
so he wasn't a big fan of this. Okay,
but like he beats bluffs.
Yeah.
Like I get it. It just doesn't necessarily feel like the right. But I also wouldn't necessarily say it's super costly to deviate here. Like if he suspects that I'm like if he is just confident that I'm bluffing, you know, being
in the end. I mean, if you've got the guy as having king 6, king 7, king 2 off, whatever, how many combos did we just list off there? 36.
Yeah. And I like his approach to the game, I'm aware is different than mine. So like, I think he's made some unusual looking plays that have made him a good chunk of money over the years too.
Yeah, fair. Well said. So we're going to do another hand. This was one of the, I don't know about stranger. It was a huge pot that you and I were involved in, where I don't think either of us at the time was just like, I don't know. Hopefully I played it right. Guessing, fuck, this is just difficult. I've got a chip lead here. Taylor is going to shove, what is this? Effectively shoves about 17 bigs in the small blind versus my button open. And you pick up ace queen O in the big blind. So let's pick it up with your first decision here, which I thought was relatively straightforward, but I want to hear if you've got any different thoughts.
First, I just want to say kudos on picking like what might be like one of the most painful hands I've ever experienced. But I actually do think it is quite interesting strategically.
We love pain here on the podcast.
Everybody loves pain, you know? Like, it's just, if you're watching, sometimes you don't care who wins, you just want blood.
We're going to see the Super Bowl, in 2 weeks. And what are they going to flash to? They're going to keep showing the losing quarterback on the sideline. They're going to keep showing the fans of the team that lost. We love to see the pain in the eyes. No pain yet. We're just concentrating at this point.
So it is a raise on the button and a pseudo jam. I am not confident that he wants to be doing non-all-ins for whatever reason here, but like, I think it is a very common thing that people just automatically do it. I think it might be slightly imprecise. I'm not sure, and it probably doesn't matter, but it does make our hand a little bit more relevant. I think I start by only playing cold calls here. Like, I don't jam anything. Like, especially if he's doing like the I'm not going all in game. If he is prepared to fold, it's like, oh, like you reopen the action, he decides to fold. Great. You just lost your tournament because I have the option of folding too, you know?
Yeah.
But I think I don't give him that. Like, if I jam and you rejam, then he could potentially fold some stuff. And I'm not
and
even.
You're not going to jam.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wonder here with you have to put in 255 less. And sometimes I just have a huge hand on the button. I'm going to re-raise. I don't know, like a quarter of a pip. This has to loosen you somewhat. Not, it's going to be imperceptible, but I would think you just get to call the tiniest bit more, like 0.2% more, maybe. Probably not even that much.
I could imagine it being more relevant than that.
I'm picturing something like maybe you've got 7s or 8s or whatever, and something that was mixing versus Taylor's jam, probably 7s. I don't know.
I think is definitely a call. Ace 10 feels dicey, and even Ace Jack. I don't know. Like, might just be a fold. I would call Ace Jack suited for sure. Maybe Ace Jack is just too good, but I imagine like the potential collision between the two of you, like I'm incentivized to wait. He's jamming. He has 1.35, so it's like 17 blinds, let's say.
Yeah.
And you and I being quite a bit deeper effective. I think call is for sure right.
If you recall, this was live streamed, so we were catching some things on delay. Taylor, probably an hour prior to this, had flatted King 2 suited in the small blind, which told me he's not really respecting ICM much at all. So you might have had that info. It's tough for me to imagine you would have folded Ace Jack for whatever that's worth.
I didn't remember that. Like I don't remember necessarily thinking that like Ace Queen was my bottom. So I think that is very relevant given like the next data, the next decision.
Fair. So my spot, I'm making you play it. What the fuck? How do we look at this spot just with our range? We know you have something damn good. Taylor, it's not jamming nothing. Not loving life. What the fuck have I done? Wish I was at Joshua Tree taking some shrooms.
I think you probably do want some non-all-in raises. My recollection is I thought the size that you picked, did you go like 2.1?
Yeah. Let's see here. I'm blowing some chips into the pot. 2.1 feels right to me. 2.3.
2.3. It feels like a touch big, but like completely understandable, given there's the extra money in the pot. Something that I liked about this situation is that Taylor, I think, used like 1 or 2 time banks before calling, even though like he has to call.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. They flashed the camera to you here, but I think action is still on Taylor, and we're going to have some tea. We're going to think about this.
And I was like, this is great for me because I'm in this like situation where like now I'm in a tough spot and I get to think about it. But I think him folding here would be like a total disaster. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And he's putting in 250 for the opportunity to win. We said he started with 1.7, like 250 to win 5.1 million chips.
Whoa! Why do we go to commercial break? All right, back to yours.
I think he has to call, and then the way that I think about this sort of spot, like the first thing is, do I think using a non-all-in re-raise by you, is it quote unquote a real play? And I generally came to the next, I assumed that it was a real play, and I was just like, okay, what would I want to do with, say, 2 aces? I would assume I want to call to keep your bluffs in. I don't feel super confident. It could be a situation the pot is big enough that I just want to make sure I stack you. I think ranges are like quite obscure here. Like if you have 9s, I assume you're just pretty content to just call and go 3 ways and mostly check it down, try to knock out a player. Like I think a lot of your range is going to be you are quite narrow in what you have for value. I came to the conclusion that I do have some calls, and I thought I would be somewhat protected in the side pot of I would imagine that you and I generally play a little cooperatively.
Concentrating, bring a 6. King 3-2. And I'm pretty happy about that flop. Why am I happy?
You have ace king and I don't.
Yeah.
With ace king offsuit, I imagine you would have gone with the non-all-in re-raise.
I don't know. Didn't have ace king off. It's a great question. I think I would have. I
was under the impression it's like, okay, you have ace king and I don't. I think you bet 400,000.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the B10 zone here. You check. I check to make sure there are actually 2 pots. And B10.
I don't have a club. My hand is possibly the worst hand I could have. And it's in a multi-way pot where I'm just not going to have good equity. I suppose a lot comes down to what your strategy is, and it's a little bit reminiscent of like, should Ponikov's call with the ace 9, and then just like it's understandable that okay, ace queen is ahead of bluffs, but sometimes you have decent equity in a pot, or in a non-ICM situation yesterday, I came across this hand where on a paired board with 2 8s, you have 37% equity, and facing like a 15% pot bet, you still fold. Because I think it's just going to go poorly for you. And I kind of just think that's analogous here and like a more extreme example. And then like also I need to like win the pot. Like I have to show down against 2 people. Like I think like king high is about as bad as it gets for me.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of those like EP 3-bet pots where you're on the turn with hands like 8s and 9s that you have pretty reasonable equity and fold to relatively small bets because you're just going to get savaged.
Yeah. It is funny though, like the thoughts cross my mind of like, I mean, I guess you just definitely do get not all in 4 bets. And I thought it was like a touch big, but maybe it's just right. Who knows? It is certainly possible I don't get calls. And then we were off in fantasy land or like the completely unexplored land, which I imagine is generally, I think I generally do pretty well in those situations. And you strike me as someone who is good in the jungle as well, you know?
Love the chaos.
You love the chaos, and here you got maximum chaos.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to see this flop. I have no idea how this would have gone in different scenarios, but it was a weird one. I genuinely didn't know what my range, like sometimes you get these spots where you're supposed to be so narrow that you don't have any bluffs. Your bluffs are your ace, king, O, and your jacks that like hope the other guy folds, but there's like pretty much nothing that folds out better hands exactly. I wouldn't have been shocked if that was my situation on the button here. Just kind of guessed.
But you were just guessing that ace jack was supposed to be your bluff?
Yeah, I thought it's probably not going to want to be a pocket pair. I'm going to want to block Dan's easy goes. So thinking an ace seems pretty good. You're not folding pocket jack, so a jack's not terrible. Although it does
an ace jack off seems like it is better, and then like ace 5 suited. So yeah,
exactly. I want to have a lot of equity against Taylor.
And you could, and I guess also relevant. I was going to say it's relevant that he made it clear that he had a tough decision, but like, I wouldn't have thought he was as strong as 2 6s, given that like, I thought he might have used 2 time banks to call off the 255. And then maybe it's just like mind breaking ICM stuff, but like that is a spot where like, maybe he just has a bad hand and like the quality of ace high has gone down a bit.
It seems like an ace 7 in the small blind or something like that. Like he's just, that was an interesting one. So you do find the fold and see very bad news, but doesn't really end up mattering. Matters somewhat, but
turn queen, river 6, like, okay.
Yeah, you weren't going to win the main.
I think there's a lot of merit. I think that is a situation where like our responses probably come down to what we make of Taylor's tank. And then funny enough that he had 2 6s, so maybe it doesn't mean much of anything, but like I could imagine that the tank just being like a worse offsuit ace sort of situation.
Yeah. Those discussions are always interesting. I was Dietrich Fast was bringing one of those up to me a few months ago, where he had a hand that was very colored by someone's tank, and it completely changed his action. And he feels that by and large, people don't take that into account enough. I feel the other way too, where it's really difficult. I don't know, like when someone tanks versus a 3-bet and, whatever, it's just the button has an open and a 3-bet in front of them and takes forever and then folds. On the one hand, you say like, it's a good chance there's one less ace, but also that could just be the pocket 9s, pocket 8s, or king queen suited. I don't know. Like it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could narrow in their hand range a bit, but like, yeah, it could be an ace, it could be a pocket pair.
Yeah. Someday someone's going to do the math on one of those situations and tell you how valuable that info is if the person is not acting. Not me.
I don't think it would be that hard if you can be like, okay, this guy is going to have like these combinations of hands, but
yeah, 50% of the time it's eights. He's always tanks with nines. 50% of the time he tanks with tens and king, queen suited, and then these couple of ace or whatever.
And then occasionally the person is just fucking tanking for no reason because they want like to go to breaks where they could pee, or they want the blinds to go up on somebody or whatever.
Yep, true. We have reached
the most painful responses to a hand where like normally I'm like, okay, go in, do your best. And it's just like, man, it's possible I played that ace queen as badly as possible. Like, of course you don't get flats. And then once you did flat pre-flop, how do you fold to like a small bet? Like I was saying, how sometimes I take losses pretty well. And that was one that my immediate response was not a great reaction. You know, that was like I need to be left alone for a minute.
yeah. You tweeted something funny that day. I can't remember. Either you sent it to me or someone sent me a screenshot. It was just like, invited Jaffe to my barbecue today, uninvited motherfucker, or something like.
I texted you, hey, I'm having a 4th of July barbecue. Whatever happens, you want to come by? And then it's like, oh, you just fucking ruined my summer.
Understandable. On that note, we've reached the point of the podcast where I would like 3 recommendations, please. Any kind. Anything.
Okay. I touched upon this a little bit, but I will trust that your editing magic will make me look great. I would encourage people to be willing to try new things. I mentioned this earlier, but I think everyone should have a form of exercise that doesn't feel like work, that they are just excited about having in their routine. There's a lot of things out there. I have adopted plenty of habits that in my younger days I would have thought was only for weenies. And it just becomes something that I think has been a good part of my life. So I generally think be willing to try new things and stick with it long enough to like form an opinion. And then if you're like, oh, I like rock climbing.
Climb rocks.
Yeah. And then it's just good for you for all sorts of reasons. This is another thing that we touched upon, but I think there are probably plenty of people who are watching this podcast that have the potential to make a big difference in the world financially by giving to various charities. I run Double Up Drive and think we are great, but there's plenty of organizations out there. But I think there are a lot of...
I didn't ask you. Can you explain what the name Double Up, what's the implication?
Yes. So the general premise is that our team of our charity team, we put up some amount of money, like this year or somewhere around $600,000. If you are drawn to animals or you're trying to ethically offset all the fast food that you eat, we have an animal charity. You donate your $100. I take $100 from the pot. And now $200 goes to that cause. We have 10 charities generally each year, and you get to choose. And it's generally in such a way that there should hopefully be a cause that you enjoy, be it like environmental factors, helping refugees, malaria nets, animals, the environment. Like we try to have like a wide cast of nets, and we generally stay away from political stuff, like so everyone's happy. We have a 1-minute video on our website that does a good job of describing what we do, just like a cartoon graphics of what we did. So I'll give you the link for that. In the 10 years that I have been doing this, we've raised close to $30 million.
Let's go.
Thank you. I have expressed a lot of, like, my relationship with poker has definitely changed over the years. But I'm thrilled that I get to do something that I'm aware has made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. And I bring this up because I think there are a lot of people out there who may be watching this podcast where, like, I don't know, if you're a high stakes poker player and I had this profound realization years ago. Early on in the drive days, I was playing high stakes DFS, and there was this backup. There were these two tight ends who you had the option of playing, and I was playing like $175,000 worth of contest that week, and I'm like, am I going to hedge? Like, these two guys are similarly good, and I'm like, you know what? The sim says this guy is just 1 point better. I'm just going to roll him in all 175K and gamble on it. I'm like, oh. Like, I don't especially care about like reducing my risk for this 175. Like, that is an amount that I'm comfortable losing. That's how much I'm going to donate this year. I think we are disconnected from money, given that we gamble for high stakes very regularly. And I think if you literally won't even notice if the money is gone, you should at least consider doing something good with it that, like, I think most people will look back on and be proud. And for the third thing, we discussed getting ethical meat for a bit. I am a member of this meat club called the First Light Steakhouse. Let me just make sure that is in fact the name. It's firstlight.farm. Their beef and venison is from New Zealand, and it's all grass-fed, organic, treated well, yada, yada. It's not super expensive. I think I pay $175 a month to get 5 pounds of meat, which is like a little bit spendy, but like, you go to a bougie grocery store, you can definitely pay more, you know? I feel great that the meat is treated well. And I also will just say, as a person who really loves steak and this sort of thing, like, they put out a really great product. So I will give them a shout out.
Nice. I'm going to check it out. We recently found a farm nearby that we've been getting our meat at, but I kind of want more meat.
I personally love having a bunch of meat in the freezer, and then it just leads to me, like, once or twice a month, I have a bunch of friends over. I sous vide some like venison ribs or whatever they give me that month. And it's just like a great reason to hang out and like
carnivore party.
Yeah. There's usually some people who make sides and like salad. Not me, but one of them.
Dan Smith, thank you very much.
This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did this.
Appreciate it.